Dear Mr. Minister, dear friends, guests, colleagues, I am happy to welcome you at the 6th Annual Cultural Diplomacy Forum that the Ukrainian Institute traditionally organizes together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, dear Minister, for clear messages and for your support that we all feel and value. I do not know whether my thoughts will be as optimistic as yours, because I would like to share with you some considerations that I and the whole team of the Ukrainian Institute have every day. We try to reflect on the experience of our work over the last 7 years, and we often attempt to summarize these reflections. So I suggest we think about them and look into the future, and also try to imagine how we have to keep developing our cultural diplomacy in view of the upcoming trends. Obviously, we've seen an unprecedented attention to Ukraine from the world, and our cultural presence has extended significantly. We've become more visible, more interesting for people, even though we keep paying a huge price for that. Cultural and diplomatic community have faced this challenge with a lot of dignity, and we've kept working to increase our institutional capacities, and our partners abroad can see it. But it seems to me that this spike of interest is already behind us, and the attention from the foreign societies has stabilized or is even in decline. It doesn't mean that we will go back to the past, to the situation before February 2022. I think that changes have already happened, and that's something we cannot neglect. And today, Ukrainian culture is considered as a full-fledged participant of international relations. It's also about the principles of interaction, and any discussion about European culture would be incomplete without representatives of Ukrainian culture. That's the position that more and more of interlocutors, even outside of Europe, share. And we are currently at a point when emotional mobilization and hectic solidarity have to be transformed into new policies and cooperation tools, because that's the foundation of international cultural relations.
American researcher Jean Minot said that the diplomacy runs in a long term, and it forms through formation of trust. The experience of Ukrainian Institute confirms this idea. There is a growing demand abroad not for heroic stories but for competences and for expertise. The interest of Ukraine, of course, the interest to Ukraine will not subside, will not go away, but we need by ourselves to sustain it and to maintain it. Now it's our responsibility and not somebody else, and we need to take this responsibility. Over these 4 years, Ukraine stopped to be just to be an exotic of suffering. Yes, many our partners still see Ukraine through the lenses of war and not future, because it's more easier for them to be compassionate to us than to rather than to cooperate with us. But already some people started to perceive us not as a periphery, not as a some fringe country on the fringes, but as an independent culture. And Ukraine experiences a new type of subjectivity when the culture becomes not for the sake of self-explanation, but just as an act of act of creativity. And of course, Ukraine has its weaknesses, and it needs to reconsider itself. And the Russia-Ukraine war changed many ideas. It has shaken old hierarchies, East, West, teacher, subject. And now we also can teach a lot Europe and together grow with the European countries. Ukraine defends its position in the face of international society, and we need also to measure our ambitions. But we need also to realize that civil society is not quite ready to this challenge, because this is a big task for many years ahead. Our problems, we know our problems very well: the lack of resources, overloading, just physical overloading of artists, and the lack of international experience. Many of what is being created in the Ukrainian art is not much appealing abroad. As society, we know little our culture, but hopefully we're catching up very quickly. Cultural diplomacy in this way helps us to understand ourselves, to look for the names and for manifestations in our culture which might not be known widely known in Ukraine, but and yet very important. The change of paradigm in the cultural diplomacy, I think, means a big mental shift, which will require a lot of mental and intellectual efforts from the managers of diplomacy and artists of the politics. And I'm confident that intellectual culture is and will continue to remain the core of our cultural diplomacy, because, as Yaroslav de Grexak said, the nation that does not produce paradigm becomes a background for somebody else's creativity. In fact, the European countries, there are many adult population who can be consumers of the cultural ideas. Over half of French citizens visit plays, 40% go to museums. In Britain, 1 of 4 adults goes to a museum. Recent researches of cultural practices in Ukraine indicate that there are also some figures, points out some figures that about 70% of youth regularly attend cultural events. And what I am coming at, that culture is an essential part of formation of the person, individuality, and a huge tool in the international politics, and it's a huge market as well. So the cultural diplomacy means to promote cultural diplomacy means to also to look at your own work, at your own art through the eyes of the other person to whom you speak through the piece of art. And it's also very useful to be able to look at ourselves from a distance. I communicate a lot with foreign experts, and I constantly hear excitement, feedback, how Ukrainian culture is capable to represent itself in a difficult times. I am not saying this to flatter myself or the present audience, but because I think we need to thank and to mark the work of those who are doing this work. We would not be able, to be honest, to do this work, and these kind words I address to all the people. I think that the experience of Ukraine is very unique, because no other country managed to use the cultural diplomacy as a defense tool from a hybrid aggression. Ukraine really using theoretical base and practical cultural diplomacy tools. And the aggression of Russia against Ukraine proves even to the skeptical people that cultural diplomacy cannot be just limited by the pieces of art, but and the culture itself as the space outside of politics. Being an authoritarian country, Russia uses its culture to impose its point of view, to manipulate public opinion, to enforce violence, and to distort society from its crimes against humanity. And Ukraine, on the other hand, promotes its diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, to defend its sovereignty, to defend it from hybrid threats, to overcome Russian domination, and to debunk those stereotypes that exist in the world. And a very bright example of this theme became the selected theme for the season of Ukrainian culture in France. We jointly prepared this project with French Institute in Kiev and Paris, and among all the options suggested to us in terms of communication theme, we selected this one. Culture fights back means the culture fights back. And this happens because French people want to see our resistance. They don't want. They are ready. They don't want. They don't want to turn away from it. They are ready to speak, to carry out difficult conversations with us and to hear voices. Our voices, difficult maybe voices, but I think this is a huge turnaround, because 4 years ago I couldn't imagine such a response, such a reaction, and such a compassion and cooperation from our partners of this country. Cultural diplomacy is not limited by the circumstances of war. We have a long period of rebuilding, revitalizing after the war. And we have a long way of reintegration with the European Union and NATO. And these tasks are existentially important for Ukraine, and hence cultural diplomacy, we must view cultural diplomacy as a safety component. And I'm very grateful to you that you talk about this. We need to communicate this message to our authorities and to Ukrainian society. Speaking about the aggressor country, we need to recognize that the radical efforts to push Russia from international cultural stages have been effective, but do not work any longer. Of course, we need to keep up with the basic hygiene and not to invite some pro-authoritarian artists, but also we need to accept the fact that Russia gradually will get back its lost positions, and we will meet with Russia at the field of pragmatic competition over the attention of the foreigners. And so instead of fighting its culture, we need to propose quality alternative, not just defy, but also to create new senses and new cultural objects. I think next years will be defining whether Ukraine will be able to preserve and to grow its cultural influence after the war. It's important to stop thinking by the events and start thinking by the strategies. And I'm very glad that today we discuss and I hope we will approve the strategy of the Ukrainian Institute for the next 5 years. The main points of the strategy will be expansion of the priority geography in Asia, Africa and Latin America. It also includes education and language and the development of Ukrainian studies and starting to teach Ukrainian language as a foreign language abroad, and also expanding Ukraine and expanding Ukraine onto the key cultural events in the world. and worked with the academia and, of course, allocation of greater resources for the needs of culture and cultural diplomacy, so that they are being taken into account not only in the state budget but also in the future plans of renovation of Ukraine. Polish writer Milosz said that culture exists so that society could get the truth about the real time, and I think this very well reflects our current situation and the future, and will dictate the topics which will be discussed at this year Forum of the Cultural Diplomacy. I'm grateful for your attention and wish you a very good time at this event.